Hello, good evening, and welcome to another episode of History on Your Doorstep with me, Graham Loveluck-Edwards, here on Bro Radio. In tonight's show, we're going to be talking about the history of Barry docks, and Barry more generally, but in particular the docks, such a pivotal part of our history, influenced so much of what led to the establishment of the town and what we see today. And today I'm delighted to be joined by my guest, Nick Hodges. Hello, Nick.
Hello there.
Hello, welcome on board. Great to have you here. Nick, for those who don't know, is part of the Victorian Barry Facebook group and Instagram book and the Victorian Barry Experiences and Walks that many of you may have participated in. And if you live in Barrack Ward, he's also one of your councillors. So there we go, he gets around. And today is going to be talking to us mainly about the origins of our town, which were humble initially, but obviously ended up being the biggest town in Wales, is the claim I hear today, all on the back pretty much of the Industrial Revolution. So we're going to start off by talking a little bit about what was here before the docks got their grip and establishing, what our starting point was. Then talking a little bit more about the heyday and about when the ships came in and the coal was being shipped out and what happened there. And then we'll finish up talking a little bit about how you can keep in touch with what's going on. Find out exactly what these guys are doing to keep all of that legacy alive. Talks and walks and tours and things that you can do online. Bringing us right up to date. So let's kick off with the very beginning, Nick. Before the Industrial Revolution, there was a town here. There was some kind of an establishment. There were a few people here and there. What was Barry like before the Industrial Revolution?
Well, the Industrial Revolution largely passed what we now call Barry. It just didn't happen here.
Right.
We were a small rural area relying on farms. We were 3 small parishes, and people are sometimes amazed when I say, well, the biggest one was Carrickston
right.
in the east, then you had the parish of Merthyr in the centre,
yeah,
and tiny, and I usually say tiny, because it really was Barry in the west.
Right.
They weren't really connected so much, it just wasn't happening, there was nothing there, there was no need to come there. And in fact, one of the stories I love is that the postman delivering any mail would arrive once a week by horseback from Cardiff.
Good grief.
There were no real roads, there was no real infrastructure, of course it was all before the railways.
Yeah.
There was virtually nothing here, it was a collection of farms, and that was about it.
Yeah, I've seen a quote from John Leyland, which obviously goes way back to the 16th century,
yes.
when he visited, and he essentially described it. He's more concerned with the course of the streams.
Yes.
There's barely any mention of a settlement other than the castle being in ruins, a mention of the farmland and the chapel over on the island, and that's pretty much it. I mean, how long was it like that?
Well, up to basically the creation of the docks. Right. I mean, there really was not a lot here. Those cottages and farmsteads were quite old in their way, but there was literally not a lot here.
Right.
Some big estate owners, and that was it.
Yeah. Funnily enough, we had Sir Brooks Boothby here not so long ago, and he was talking about the estates and how they branched out and where Barry was within it, and how it was hardly a jewel in the crown. So we get an idea of how quiet it was. One thing I've heard as well, I don't know how true this is, but the tiny little church of St Kyrig's in Porthkerry, of which I happen to be a warden, was the parish church for the western side of Barry. So.
Yeah, I mean the other churches came later. I mean, with the creation really of the town to what it's become now, with the building of the docks, we had a massive influx of new churches and everything else.
Yes.
But you're right, there were some of these old historic churches around. Interesting about Leland and the course of the various rivers and tracks and streams and everything. We discovered the route of the Barry Brook.
Oh, right.
And it came down from Cwm Barry Way, the valley of the Barry, up off present-day Pontypridd Road, and came down between the old market hall, the Wetherspoons pub,
right,
and off down there. And you can still see where the gaps are, where it was eventually covered over. It's still there.
Oh, right.
And that, interestingly, became one of the natural boundaries between the parish of Barry and Merthyr Dyfan in the centre.
Oh.
So what you consider now, what was Barry as a parish,
Yeah.
is quite shifted, really, quite west into the modern town.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So it was divided up into how many different areas initially?
3 main parishes.
Right, right.
But what I do like is there was a story that came out in 1899,
Right.
which, for those who know, is 10 years after the first dock opened. And there was a meeting of the fairly new Barry Urban District Council, which had only been set up in 1894. And they'd been approached by the Ordnance Survey.
Right.
And the Ordnance Survey said, wow, your place is really growing. It's time for us to do an updated map. And the council were really, really pleased, because that's something you would want.
Putting Barry on the map.
Absolutely. But they said, we can't do it until we know what your place is called. Because there was all these various versions. There was people called it Cadoxton Juxta Barry,
Yeah.
Barry Town, Barry Dock. They called it all sorts of things. And there was a fair few other names as well. So they literally had a meeting in the council.
Yeah.
And the then chairman, who we enjoyed finding his gravestone in Barry Cemetery recently, literally stood up and said, look, we got to get on with this. I propose we call it Barry. All agreed, yes, done. So they wrote back, the map was produced, and officially, for the first time, Barry was Barry.
Barry was Barry in
Yeah.
1899. Wow. That's when you consider how long there's been a settlement here. That's taken a while, hasn't it? That's taken a while.
But we encompassed the whole of the old 3 parishes then, you see, because they were starting to join together with all the house building and shop building and all the various roads that you needed for what was to be a modern town.
Yeah, of course. So we have a collection of diverse parishes. So nothing recognisable to what we have now. We've got an idea of what the layout of the Barry was in terms of the stream and in terms of things like that. We've got a moment in time when it became Barry. But I guess the majority of the stuff that led up to that moment was probably no more than 10, 15 years up to that point in time, because the pace at which it developed was just breakneck pace. So when did the docks and the sort of foundations that we see today, when did they begin?
Okay. Well, July 31st, 1884, the bill through Parliament to actually build Barry Dock was passed.
Right.
They tried since for the few years before that, but it kept getting blocked. Now, of course, the main man, as we all know, David Davies, a Mid-Wales Liberal MP, was pushing for this, mostly because he was fed up of the now useless and clapped-out Cardiff docks,
Right.
owned by Lord Bute.
Yes.
Big Tory,
Yeah.
and the owner of Cardiff Castle and Castell and huge amounts of land, the richest man in the world at the time.
Yeah.
And every time that David Davies proposed and tried to push these things through the House of Commons, he actually blocked it then Bute in the House of Lords. So we have this to and froing, and basically in the end, the promoters of the bill, David Davies, Lewis Davies of Ferndale, other owners of various collieries in the Rhondda, said enough is enough and got it through. And then, of course, everything really kicked on.
Yeah.
The fascinating thing is that whilst we had the Cardiff docks opened in 1839, literally 50 years before Barry, and Penarth docks, smaller but important, in 1851, the push was because Cardiff was tidal.
Right.
So you could only enter and leave at certain times.
Yeah.
There was huge backlog. The railways were clapped out. The infrastructure was clapped out. The cranes were old. He didn't spend, and rich people tend not to do this, spend on updating and improving. And he was, the colliery owners thought he was ripping them off, basically.
Are you questioning trickle-down economics?
Absolutely. Well, when it trickles down to me, I might enjoy some, But so you had this move, and what they did, the promoters and the organisers and the architects of what was to become Barry Dock, they literally looked at every single place between Cardiff and Swansea,
right,
to see what was best. They settled on Barry Island, effectively, because literally enclosing Barry Island, which of course was an island, on both ends, you would create this huge, vast area. But it wasn't just that. It was a lot of the land as well. I mean, we do walks in Barry and show them where the tidal line used to come up to.
Right.
And people are gobsmacked.
Roughly where is it in terms of something we could get our heads around?
Effectively up to the railway.
Oh, right.
Oh,
okay.
yeah. I mean,
Wow.
there was just the railway tunnel by the good sheds now, Hood Road, on top of what is now the built-up viaduct and everything there for the railway.
Yeah.
There was a little house quite a big house called East Barry House.
Okay.
And of course that's in what you would regard as west of Barry now.
Right, yeah,
And of course it
yes.
was the east of that old parish.
Yeah.
And they used to have a little jetty for their boat.
Wow.
And it's just like, everyone you're underwater now, it's phenomenal.
Good.
The land reclamation was immense.
Yeah.
And of course, the fascinating story of the building of the dock was the huge amount of manpower and money that was required to make this all happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And as quickly as it happened as well.
Absolutely.
Because
Yeah.
it was, it was, as I said, it was a bit of a breakneck thing when it actually got some momentum.
It still took 4 years.
Right.
And the thing is, what was phenomenal is, I think people, when they hear the word navvy, think, oh, some drunken old brute who's come along and got a job. And these were well-trained people.
Right.
They had to train for a year, not only to learn how to pace themselves and move the huge amounts of muck and rock and everything, but to build up their body strength.
Yeah.
And what people think quite funny when I explain is they had to virtually survive on a diet of beer and beef.
Yes.
The beer for the protein, the beef especially for the protein, but the beer because the water supply wasn't up to much either.
Yeah.
And they were phenomenal. They could shift, and people thought that they could apply for a job. And we had lots of guys from the farms coming in for the good money.
Yeah.
And they just didn't make the grade.
Good Lord.
So you had 3,500-4,000 of these navigators working virtually non-stop with some machinery.
Yeah.
But the vast majority of it was done by
hand.
brute power.
Absolutely
Yeah.
incredible. When you consider, and I was you consider, the size of what they ended up creating.
Absolutely.
I mean, that is just
The other fact that people may not realise is that people go on about health and safety gone mad nowadays.
Yeah.
And I say, well, thank God, because in the creation of that dock, 150 men died.
Good Lord.
And they were considered acceptable numbers.
Right. Yeah.
And many ended up having life-changing and life-threatening injuries as well.
Yeah.
Because you're talking rock, you're talking dynamite, you're talking machinery, you're talking flooding, you're talking, everything else that went with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're actually trying to consider getting a plaque put up by the number one dock, which would be by the new Welsh School.
Yeah.
And to actually commemorate that, because that's forgotten.
Yeah. And yes, you. It's quite easy to lose sight of what conditions were like back then, and why, when things like the union movement came along, how revolutionary it seemed.
Absolutely.
To have somebody, we may make jokes about people with clipboards and high-vis jackets now, but back then it was just so far removed.
Absolutely.
I mean, it just absolutely critical. So we've got all these navvies over here. Where did they in the main come from?
Well, they were mostly Irish.
Right.
Because that was a job that they really fell into, sort of thing.
Yeah.
Because there was anti-Catholic emancipation, there was all sorts going on, and they found their niche and they worked hard. What you must remember is that these guys moved as a group.
Yeah.
But every project that they did, they lost quite a substantial number, not only to death and injury, but if you're working on a 3 or a 4 year project somewhere, a major project, a number of them would settle down and want to live in this new town. They'd find a local girl, marry, have kids, and just settle down. So there was this constant renewal that had to go on. But one thing I find absolutely amazing to this day is Barry has one statue to David Davis in front of the dock office there, looking at the plans of Barry. Fantastic. I look at the list of people that were involved in the creation of Barry Dock, and they have statues to them.
Right.
But not in Barry.
But not here.
They have them in Cardiff, they have them in Aberdare, they have them in London. I mean, these are the people, these were the builders who built the Manchester Ship Canal.
Right.
They built Tower Bridge.
Yeah.
They built the Severn Tunnel.
Right.
Huge schemes.
Yeah.
But they all all of them, to a man, regarded the number one that they completed as Barry Dock.
Good Lord.
They will all say that in their memoirs and in interviews at the time, because it was huge. It was going to be the biggest organised dock in the world.
Yeah.
It set the world record for tonnage exported. It had all the new technology.
Right.
Now, as clapped out as Cardiff was, we had the modern cranes. We had huge railway system coming in.
Yeah.
We had 24-hour working because they used electric arc lights. 3 8-hour shifts. This is something that didn't happen. The rest of the town didn't get electricity until 1924.
Right.
You know,
But we had it
the
in the
docks
docks.
had it because it was how to work.
So it was planned.
Oh,
So
absolutely.
It didn't just evolve
No,
to be the biggest
no,
dock.
no.
It was right from the start. This is our goal. We are going to create the
Yeah.
biggest dock in the world. Good
Yeah.
Lord, I had no idea. That's remarkable.
Yeah.
And going back to the navvies as well.
Yes.
Because you said the numbers would dwindle. I mean, what was the working age of somebody who did a job like that? Because it's pretty physical work. I can imagine it was
18 to 70.
Right.
You know, I mean,
all the way through, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
I mean, it was hard, brutish work. It must have been really cruel on the body.
Yeah.
But they were well paid.
Yeah.
And it gave them opportunities they probably would not be able to get anywhere else.
Yeah.
But it has to be remembered and realised that these were professional men.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, they lived hard, they played hard, they suffered for their trade, they went through hardship, but it was well paid, and they were in demand.
Yeah.
They
yeah.
really were in demand.
Right. Okay. You mentioned about some of the people who were instrumental in this, who maybe recognised elsewhere, but for whatever reason aren't recognised here. Who are we talking about? Give us some names.
Well, one nice local one is T.A. Walker. He was the contractor for the Severn Tunnel and the Manchester Ship Canal. And in fact, the area sort of in Barry now, so that's your Broad Street, High Street, and those sort of areas, and the streets going up Queen Street and Princess Street and all that, they were basically built by him, not only for his workers, but also for trade. He built the Barry Hotel and owned that as well.
Right.
But a modern parallel I like is that we all do our recycling now as a done thing. He recycles that huge amount of that rock and stone to build those houses.
Oh.
And if you look at the edges of them, you see this quite rough limestone, but my God, it's lasted.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful, and it gives quite a distinctive look to the area.
Yeah.
And let's face it, if you're digging out 5 million tons of rock and God knows what are you going to do with it?
Yeah, quite.
You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very true.
Yeah. So, and of course, you didn't have to hump it far either.
No, that's right.
So that was wonderful. So that was T.A. Walker. He was superb.
Yeah.
But the engineers, you hear of them, and it's like J. Wolfe Barry,
Yeah.
T. Forster Brown, Brunel, the son.
Right.
Fantastic people. I mean, you just look at the numbers that when the hole was dug and when they literally managed to shove it up, they then had to encase it all.
Yeah.
So you got 5 million cubic yards of soil and rock moved. 200,000 cubic yards of masonry laid.
Good Lord.
I mean, they employed masons, carpenters. This was massive.
Yeah.
31 locomotives employed at any one time, day and night.
Good.
Shifting the stuff, bringing supplies in, bringing this in.
Yeah.
Absolutely huge.
And where did all these other people come from then? Because we're talking about an army of thousands here by the sounds of things.
Well, Barry is a immigrant town.
Right.
There was nothing here. There was 500 people here of all ages.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, you need thousands of people to work here, thousands of people to supply them, look after them, feed them. You name it, businesses moved in, and they came from anywhere and everywhere.
Right.
A lot from the southwest of England, a lot from mid Wales and West Wales. Basically, people either looking to make a new life for themselves, set up an opportunity for themselves, and in a number of circumstances, run away from other issues in other places. Create a new opportunity for themselves. I mean, J. Wolfe Barry, he was the president of the Institute of Civil Engineers.
Yeah.
He actually said, this was the big one.
Yeah.
Phenomenal. And he did the Tower Bridge, Kew Bridge, various things,
Yeah. But this was the achievement. This was the pinnacle.
This was the big one. Nothing had been done in that way, in that scale before. You weren't going into a coastline and digging in.
Yeah.
You were creating a new coastline by digging out.
Yeah.
You know, you were creating it, you were forming it, and you know, they didn't get it right every time, first time, but they persevered and got it on. I mean, the engineering failed once or twice. There were floodings; they had to pump out and start again, and it went to plan, and it went to budget, and they got on with it.
Wow, absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
So we're talking about the birth of a town from relatively humble origins through the vision of creating this incredible modern cutting edge facility to which by the sounds of it put Cardiff totally in its shadow in terms of what it was capable of doing. You had thousands of people coming into the area, and the next thing you know, we have our docks, and our docks are operational, and the vision starts to be achieved. So now we're going to delve a little bit more into what it was like when the docks were here. You know, what it was like, what Barry was like, what the life of people who worked there was like, to get a sort of a more a tangible grip on the look and feel of Barry at that point in history. So the docks opened when? Remind me again.
1889.
1889. I guess we're right at the very end of the 19th century. At that point, the output of coal from the various collieries right the way across Wales was absolutely exceptional. Millions of tons going out. And suddenly there was this new facility that people could take advantage of if they weren't happy with what was going on at Cardiff. They had this. So how quick was the uptake amongst the mine owners in South Wales to use this new dock?
Straight away, because a lot of the mine owners were actually part of the syndicate that helped build the dock.
Right.
They wanted it to service their collieries. They bought into and helped finance the scheme. They were part of the directors of the board that ran it, because you had the Barry Railway Company, you had the dock company. They were all involved because it was all a joined up enterprise, and it had to be to work.
I mean, so it's great that kind of holistic approach to something of that size. I mean, we could learn something from that today. There's a number of massive projects that could do with having a bit of joined up thinking. So you had all these people who were already behind it. So I take it once it was established, there wasn't a need for it to evolve anymore. It was kind of the finished product from day one, or were there further phases?
The dock worked straight away. Ships were queuing on day one to get there. They wanted to make the show. I mean, one fascinating aspect is literally a few weeks ago, my wife and I, who do this Victorian Barry Experience and are looking to collect stuff available for public showing in the future, we came across a rather tatty, bedraggled 3-inch piece of ribbon. Right. And we bought it for £175. Okay. And that sounds like, what are you doing? Was my wife upset? No, she said we had to have it, and I totally agree with her. And it was a piece of the original ribbon that was cut at the opening of the dock. No. It tied the first ship, to the dock. And one of the director's wives cut the ribbon rather theatrically with a silver sword. Okay. And then at all the events and feasts and meals and dinners and everything else that went on, pieces of ribbon were given out to the VIPs. Wow. And whoever would have thought, I must have a piece of that ribbon, never thought about it. It comes available, we had to have it. And we got it. And it's phenomenal. Something from day one of modern Barry.
And so such a tangible reminder of that crucial day. Absolutely remarkable. So there are other ribbons like this knocking about, no doubt.
Possibly, but if it's not,
check their
but if it's not marked, you wouldn't know, would you? I mean, a ribbon is a ribbon is a ribbon, really. It's a very sexy bit of ribbon.
I bet.
It's woven silk,
right,
and quite thick. But it's there, and it's been authenticated, and it's real, and it's wonderful.
Absolutely superb.
You're touching history with that.
Of course. You can get the vibes from it. So once that ribbon was cut and the docks are open and we've got ships queuing up, At that point, I mean, how many people were working on the docks there, roughly?
Well, that's a good question. It did build up over the first few weeks, but you're talking about all the railwaymen.
Yeah.
You're talking about the teams of trimmers.
Yeah.
The trimmers who got the coal from the hoists, or from the trains into the hoists, into the holds of the ships.
Yeah.
And they worked in teams of 12, basically.
Right.
On 3 8-hour shifts. You had sort of 8 men in the boat,
Yeah.
levelling the layers of coal as it was being poured in by shovel.
Right.
You had 3 guys on the top sort of making sure it all went in and worked, and you had 1 guy who was literally throwing a bucket over the side to get the water to dampen down the dust, which would have been quite shocking.
Yeah, of course.
And these guys worked hard. Dangerous, dirty job.
Yeah.
Hundreds of those. And what's fascinating, for my sins, I'm also the chairman of the Merthyr Gyfyn, the Barry Cemetery.
Right.
And we did a thing a few years ago where we walked around and we thought, well, let's just find some of the most impressive gravestones we can find.
Mm-hmm.
Because they would have cost money. If you had money, you probably did something and probably had a researchable history.
Yeah.
There's a story to tell. And some of the big ones we found were coal trimmers, which was quite unexpected, because this was effectively a manual job, a dirty manual, but they were well paid.
Right.
And they were paid as well on tonnage, and they had various bonuses, and so these were well paid people.
Fantastic.
But it was a filthy job, but it had to be done.
Yeah.
Because if you sent a ship out that wasn't fully levelled or trimmed, it'd sink.
So the job was literally levelling off the load.
Yeah. If you think about you pour any powder or something,
instinctively
it forms
heaps.
a pile.
Yeah.
Well, you didn't want that in your holds. Not only would you get less coal in, but it would be uneven.
Yeah.
So these guys were literally levelling or trimming it. And there's a picture of me that we use quite a lot for our Victorian Barry Experience, and I wear a bowler hat.
Right, yes.
I do dressing up as well for it. And people think I'm quite posh, playing a posh role.
Yeah.
It's gold trimmer.
Oh.
Because the bowler hat was the closest thing you had to a safety helmet.
Oh, right, okay.
You know, no fancy plastic padded helmets in those days. Yeah.
Superb. So the bowler hat was the hard hat.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. So did you research any individual coal trimmers? Did you look into history and find anything about any of them?
There were hundreds.
Right.
I mean, there really, really were hundreds, and they were just normal people doing their normal things. I mean, the fascinating one we did come across, there was one guy, and he had a beautiful stone. It's still there. It's gorgeous, and we researched him, and we found that he had worked for, at the docks for years.
Yeah.
He didn't have any particular politics. He wasn't a member of any particular clubs or societies. And in fact, we drew quite a blank. And I was disappointed. So we then researched his wife, who was also on the stone. And we found that she was a good woman who brought up the children and looked after the house, and, but there was nothing to grip you, no real story there.
Yeah.
So we looked up the daughter, who died tragically young, and we found pages and pages and pages. And this is outside the Victorian era. This is the end of the First World War. Quite simply, she worked for the council. Mm-hmm. She was a clerk working for the council. She used to give part-time elocution lessons as well.
Good Lord.
She was a well-talented and supposedly quite beautiful young lady.
Yeah.
So her funeral, the town virtually came to a standstill, because the docks came out because of the dad.
Yeah.
The council came out because of the girl.
Yeah.
They no doubt had their family and friends. And basically it had been a tragic accident.
No.
And the other part of the docks is the railways, and it was an accident with the railway. She had taken her girlfriend, to the Barry Dock station.
Yeah.
To wave off a soldier back to barracks to go back to the front.
Mm-hmm.
Don't know who he was, boyfriend, a friend, schoolmate, don't know. And they did the old railway children lark. The train pulled out, they ran alongside waving and all this.
Yeah.
And one tripped. Both the girls fell between the train and the side of the cut there, and the friend was okay, but our girl died of her injuries. And I like to think that not only was this huge outpouring of love and regret and everything.
Yeah.
But because, of course, the bodies weren't coming back from the front in World War One, I think the town sort of like took her on as a symbol for everyone else,
Yeah, of course.
And that's phenomenal. And we would not have known that if we hadn't have found this lovely stone and thought, he's a coal trimmer, great. But it wasn't him who was the story.
No.
It ended up being his daughter.
Absolutely remarkable, isn't it? So what else? What do we know about life at that time for people who lived in Barry? I mean, I'd imagine pretty well everybody was involved in one way or another with the docks, as that story just kind of illustrates.
all the trade that supplied the docks, the chandlers, the shops, everything, was there simply because the docks was there.
Yeah.
We had all these various seamen's boarding houses for visiting seamen who would come off the ship for a few days and buy a new pair of boots, buy a new shirt, have a few beers.
Yeah.
As I say, sometimes have some fun with ladies of negotiable virtue,
Yes,
that sort of thing. Yeah. So we had all this sort of normal dock life, but everything was ultimately here because of that dock.
Yeah.
It's as simple as that.
Yeah.
And the joke was, of course, in 1889, the dock opens. The first council didn't arrive until 5 years later.
Right. How did they manage?
Well, you had a local board.
All right. Okay.
And it was a lot of worthies, and they were good people.
Yeah.
And in fact, many of them went on to be the first councillors in the new Barry Urban District Council.
Yeah.
And they were shoveling through planning applications left, right and centre. You had a planning committee of 3 people.
Right.
And they would sit down almost daily at one time and go through 20 new houses here, 40 new houses
because
there.
the town was growing so
absolutely
fast.
And it couldn't grow quick enough.
Yeah.
We actually had, the railway was important, not only for the coal, but it was the start of the first passenger railway. We actually had to have a lot of the dock workers living in Cardiff and Surrey and places like that because there wasn't enough accommodation. Right. They couldn't build it quick enough.
Yeah.
We were a town on the move, but we had to, and they moved quick, but it could not keep up. Roads were having to be built.
Yeah.
I mean, the other story I like as well, there was always this pushback.
Right.
And the example is, I've mentioned the cemetery. The cemetery opened 3 months later than the dock. It opened in the September of 1889. And it was because there was this realisation that the churchyards, if someone needed to be buried, would not be able to do it.
Right.
They weren't big enough.
There's no room, yeah.
In fact, they were largely full anyway. So you had this, you had these acts going through Parliament that were closing churchyards as future burial spaces. And these worthies got together and said that we need a municipal cemetery. And it was from the start. And there was huge pushback because there were some ratepayers who said, well, I don't want to pay for that.
Yeah.
Let the new dock pay for it with all this massive money that's going to come in through business rates and things.
Yeah.
And no, it was decided it was going to open. And lo and behold, 133 years later, the cemetery is still there. It's massive. It's got 43,000 buried in there.
Yeah.
It was the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And that was forward planning.
Yeah.
Yeah. They thought, we're going to build this. We will have the opportunity to build and take on new bits of land as we expand, because we're here for the long run.
That's what seems to be the unique thing about this development, is how elsewhere everything was reacting to the situation. There was a market grew, like if you think about in the north. So there was this expanding market for textiles and cloth, and you had a sitting experienced workforce. So they just built mills where they could fit them in. There was no plan of, okay, here's a clean sheet. Where's the best place to build this factory? It wasn't until much. I mean, it did start to happen. There are instances of them, once the canal network was in place, people making the leap of, well, hang on, why didn't I build a factory next to the canal and put some houses nearby? But that came after. I assume Barry must have been the beacon for that way of thinking, because it was just so pioneering.
The wonderful thing about Barry being 50 years after Cardiff as docks, and 30 years after Penarth sort of thing, is they could learn from their mistakes.
Yes, of course, yeah.
They could also, they had the newest technology, and they made sure that they had the newest and the best.
Yeah.
And the wonderful thing is, if you go to the patent office, which is still going, and you register your patents, the amount of new patents coming out of Barry
Right.
at the start of the dock, and these were people who were tapping into the necessary improvements and innovations that you would need for a dock with all this railway infrastructure, with everything like that. I mean, they were patents for improved railway wheels, hoists, craneage, hydraulic systems. I mean, Barry Dock had the first dock gates erected to be opened and shut by means of hydraulic rams.
Wow.
And the power from that came from the pump house.
Yeah.
You know.
Good Lord, I never put those two things
and the
together. I always
connections
thought the
were
pump
all
house was taking water out of a tunnel somewhere. I didn't realise that. Oh, good Lord. And they did think big, because again, thinking back, I did some when I was doing the interview about we should say Fun Money. He did correct me on how to pronounce it. I went to the Glamorgan archive and looked to see what they had.
Yes.
And one of the things I found, which knocked me for six, was someone had gone to whoever was in the house, the castle at the time. I think it was it pre-Boothby? I think it might have been pre-Boothby. Anyway, they were looking for someone to fund an idea to build a tunnel between Barry and the North Somerset coast, and thinking to the timelines now, this kind of ties in with some of the things that you've been talking about. So you clearly had a bunch of really ambitious people who were involved with this project, who thought the sky was the limit, thought they could keep going and going and going.
I can give you plenty of examples of that. When local government was basically virtually created in the area, like I said, with the Barry Urban District Council, they met originally in what is now a post office just off King Square there, those buildings there. They then moved to build this town hall, which they did, and it was a library. But where you have the modern extension off the side of the new library, which we opened as a council in 2007, and I'm still ridiculously proud as I'm the guy who opened it, because I was Mayor of the Vale at the time, so that was fantastic. But that was planned at the time.
Yeah.
But they ran out of money.
Right.
But behind that, which never happened, there was a belief and a push to build an opera house for Barry.
Good Lord.
Yeah. If you read the first edition of the Barry Dock News, which literally came out the day that the dock opened, the forward there, the editorial, it was, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we want to be the best. I mean, you had a council quite quickly that not only ran the gasworks, that ran the water, but it also ran the hospitals.
Yeah.
I mean, what they did was phenomenal.
Yeah.
I mean, you had 30 odd committees meeting continuously. And these were doers, these were people who knew not that it was needed then, but it would be needed in a few years, so let's do it now. Yeah, let's find the money for this. And the arguments about money were continuous, and but the money, it was a small El Dorado.
Yeah.
I mean, the money that flooded into Barry, the trade that was there, they wanted to take over the position of Cardiff. There was an urge at one time almost to be the new capital of Wales.
Yeah, yeah.
And it was believed that Barry could take that position. I mean, when the day the dock opened, the coal exchange in Cardiff shut for the day.
Right.
Because everyone who was involved wanted to be there. Half of them because they had money invested in it, and the other half because they wanted it to fail because it was going to take away from Cardiff. So they were there for a good nosy around sort of thing. Yeah. And they would have been absolutely amazed and gobsmacked by the scale of it and how well run it was going to be and how organised it would be. And it was almost too late for Cardiff to update to that way.
Yeah.
I mean, the huge amount of railway lines coming into Barry, the noise, the dust, the hooters going off, the movement of men back and forth.
Yeah.
Phenomenal.
Yeah. Absolutely fantastic. You're painting a wonderful picture here.
Oh, one try.
We've talked about the early days. We've talked about when the docks came along. We've talked about what happened to the town, what life was like. the sort of jobs that people did, and the incredible vision of the people behind the docks, who from the beginning had this joined up way of thinking about, planning for the future, laying down foundations. But the heyday came and went. When was the start of the demise, and what caused it?
Well, you may not be surprised to know it was the First World War.
Right.
The record, of course, was set in 1913 for export, so that's just before the war. That was the 11 million tonnes going out.
Right.
And 250,000 tonnes coming in, by the way, which was mostly wood for pit props and heavy machinery for the mines.
Right.
So the trains that brought the coal down would take that back up, sort of thing. We weren't a food importing or anything like that port. 1919, Treaty of Versailles.
Yeah.
The reparations that the defeated Germans were expected to pay, and they were bled dry. That was the thing that really screwed Barry as a dock.
So how's that?
Well, quite simply, if you're exporting fantastic, wonderful, expensive Welsh coal,
Yes.
why buy that when you can have dirty, useless German coal for virtually free? Because the money wasn't there for the Germans to pay, so it was taken in goods.
Yeah.
So they denuded their forests, they took their wood, they took their iron ore, and they took their coal.
Yeah.
And it may not have been as good, but you were getting it for virtually free.
Yeah.
So why buy the best when you can virtually have cheaper coal for free?
Yeah.
So the docks went into a decline, which then stepped on through the years. But that was the major kick in the teeth. And of course the thing is, you've got all these guys returning from war, looking for jobs and the brave new world that they were promised, and a land fit for heroes. And the houses weren't there, the jobs weren't there, the jobs were declining because of the capitalist greed for German goods, which of course lent on to the push for the Second World War from the Germans, because they felt they had a bad deal. You can't keep kicking someone when they're down.
No.
And that's what happened. And there were these inevitable consequences for the Welsh coal mines, and then the English coal mines as well, everywhere. It hadn't been thought through.
So you like contrast to what was happening here in Barry, where everything was forward vision, forward planning, long-term, holistic.
External forces.
Suddenly we have an external force
Yeah.
which just wanted to make a point without really thinking about the consequences of that point. And suddenly all of that amazing work is just being unstitched.
What people don't realise is that the Welsh coal, the Welsh steam coal, this high-quality carbon anthracite with its huge calorific value, was used by the Russian Navy, the French Navy, the American Navy, and it was bunkered all over the world. So the ships coming in and out, constantly taking this around the world. Phenomenal. And then all of a sudden, a lot of those opportunities were just cut, and the jobs declined, the docks declined, and the town, as an inevitable consequence, declined as well.
Right. Yeah. So what was Barry like between the wars?
Quieter. The expansion, the population growth stalled. Then, of course, if your town is going into a decline, less people want to invest, less opportunities come along. There is a wonderful quote that's often used, and it compares Barry with Cardiff, and it says, Barry, too far from God and too close to Cardiff.
Yeah.
Because Cardiff, as a capital city and a major city, will have all the opportunities, infrastructure, large investment, and Barry, you're only 8-9 miles away.
Yeah.
Go to Cardiff.
Yeah.
You know, and that's the problem that happened there, sort of thing.
Yeah. So that was the beginning. We obviously still have a dock, so it's not as if the whole thing got killed off. I mean, what kind of saved what we've got left? How did we end up with the position that we are now?
Well, the dock did other things. I mean, it brought in food and small goods. We had the bananas, of course, at one time.
Yes, I remember bananas.
There was it was the site for the Antarctic expeditionary ships and things like that. But it was always smaller.
Yeah.
But the dock themselves, the docks are, part of them are listed by Cadw. But we've actually made an application to Cadw to have the whole of the dock listed.
Oh, fantastic.
Because the history is there. I mean, I think we said in the first part just how big and revolutionary and massive and wonderful it is. Now, we may have lost all these coal hoists and cranes and things, but the structures are still there.
Yeah.
And I feel that we as a town and as a county should be selling this history and heritage more. I mean, I say as a proud member of the council that represents Barry Island, that is the jewel in the crown of the tourism industry for the Vale of Glamorgan, with our beautiful beach and everything there. But we're more than that. I want people that visit Barry not just to go to the island, to visit our town and shop in our shops and visit these sites and have it explained to them and have it laid open to them.
Yeah.
People like history. People like local history.
Yeah.
And I feel we're missing opportunities not to get into that and explain it out.
Well, what is there now? Because this is beautifully, your radio interview is a gift. You beautifully segued us into the thing I wanted to ask about next.
One tries.
Which was, what is being done to keep all this stuff alive? I mean, there's an awful lot that you do, so please, wax about your own contribution, but what else is going on to keep it alive?
There's people who have written and talked about Barry and its history for years, and I salute them, and I read their stuff, and it's fantastic. What we do, which is different, is we tend to make it more personal. We look at the real people doing real things. We look at the strange things that happened, the wacky things that happened, things that you think, well, what was that all about?
Give us an example of a wacky thing that happened.
There was there's a building in Halton Road where it's a prominent building to this day. People set up a shooting gallery there using live ammunition.
Okay.
And it was run by the people that this guy had taken on, 13 and 14-year-olds.
Right.
Handling rifles, handling live ammunition, and constantly being in court for accidentally shooting each other. Health and safety gone mad again, sort of thing. Yeah. I mean, the other thing is, people don't realise that these roads, before they had tarmac on them, they were muck roads,
Yeah.
And you had, in the summer, it would dry out and the dust would blow everywhere. In the winter, they'd become quagmires, virtual swamps.
Yeah.
Horses used to get stuck up to their withers in there, had to be dug out. The biggest ever pothole recorded in Barry was 8.5 foot deep.
Right.
This was the done thing. The metal ruts would cut this up.
Yeah.
Of course, they used to drive the cows and the sheep to the slaughterhouse along them.
Yeah.
So not only would their hooves and everything dig up the roads, but in their distress, I think they would leave plenty of dung around as well. I mean, the place stank.
Yeah.
And don't forget, the vast majority of the early town was built before sewers were put in.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, you had to have the dung collectors with their carts coming in, the honey wagons, so called because they smelt so sweet.
I can imagine.
And then of course you had to retrofit. You had to then dig up these roads to put the sewers in, so people could connect into them.
Yeah.
I mean, one wonderful story is that there was this push by the council for everyone to move away from the buckets collected to having internally plumbed toilets, which is a good thing, and connect them into the sewers. And some people resisted. They liked the good old ways, But the council literally said, if you don't do it by a certain time, we will fine you £5,
right.
Which was a lot of money,
Yeah.
probably a month's wages at the time. But of course the alternative was, if you paid to have one plumbed in, so you wouldn't get fined, it'd cost you about £5.
Right.
So they pitched that just right, I thought.
A bit of thought went into that. So when people join you on your walks, you share these sort of stories as you're walking around.
This is it. I mean, it's good to talk now.
Yeah.
But to actually point at a building,
when you're there,
or show something on the floor, or show a gap in a building, there's stories there.
Yeah.
And people say, I walk past this every day.
Yeah.
And now I'll walk past it and I'll look at it differently.
Yeah.
And it's great. I was stopped in Halton Road a few months ago by someone who thought they recognised me but didn't know why. and they pointed something out to me and told me this great story about something.
Yeah.
And I went, yeah, I know, I told you that 3 months ago on a walk. And it was like, but he just, whenever he has the urge himself to share that story.
Yeah.
And it's great.
Yeah. No.
Because we had this thing where people said, Barry hasn't got any history.
Yeah.
Or they've taken that down. Well, yeah, towns and cities evolve.
Yeah.
But the stories are still there. In many ways, the buildings are still there. And that's something that we really need to push for. Heritage is important. It's part of the new school curriculum where the children have to learn not only about local history, but there is an emphasis on Victorian. So whilst I always thought it was great that the schools of Barry and the Vale would go to St Fagans, hey, look and work and walk around your own streets.
Yeah, look what we've got here.
Yeah, and that's why we're pushing, of course, for a heritage centre in Barry, not only to remember the past, but look how it shaped the future.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, if you want an example of how the early history of our new town shapes the present, you only have to look at the fight that there was over booze, over alcohol. And what you had the temperance groups who tried to stop new licenses and everything happening, and as a result, we never had those hotels.
Oh.
And hotels were being built, they didn't get a license, so they either failed or they pulled out of the industry. These then got converted into other buildings, including a hospital, for example. And as a result, we didn't have the hotels. So as a result, I would suggest Barry never became a holiday centre, apart from the Butlins time, where people could stay in Barry. It became a day-tripping resort.
Yeah.
And that's what we have today.
Actually, it's well documented that Methodism in this part of Wales took off like wildfire. I mean, John Wesley, when he wrote about the places he visited, when he wrote about his visits to Monmouthshire, I mean, people would hurl abuse and food at him. When he came here, they lapped it up. They couldn't get enough of it. So,
well, in August 1895, all applications for new hotel licences were refused.
Right.
I mean, it was massive. So you had this history then of illegal drinking houses and all the fun and games with that. But 1897, there were 16 applications for new hotels.
Gosh.
In Barry.
Well, the need was there, wasn't
and they were all refused.
Gosh.
Yeah. So if you've got nowhere to stay, you visit by the day, you come down in the Charabanc or on the train or whatever, or nowadays you drive, which gives rise to more traffic congestion and issues like that. But we never had that opportunity to develop. The other issue, of course, always being that the beach and Barry Island is divorced from the town centre. In Porthcawl, it's right on the front. In Blackpool, it's right on the front. So you could always have that crossover between enjoying the beach and shopping. And bringing in money into the town, which is great. But apart from a few B&Bs, we virtually had no staying tourism. And that's a result of that.
Well, I never knew that. That's amazing. That's amazing.
And when I say that to people, it's like, God, yes.
It was a lights on moment for me, because I'm thinking, I'd never thought about it like that. But I mean, it's clear when you consider how big, everything else was. That's a glaring hiatus, isn't it? Okay, well, so if people want to join you on your walks or find out more about the stuff that you do, how's the best way for them to do that?
Well, we have a Facebook site, and you can look up that as Victorian Barry Experience, and it is experience. We also have a Twitter site, the same thing. We advertise the walks on it. Everything is free. We do this for civic pride, for fun, and also to show that when we go for funding towards our new heritage centre, that the support is there. I mean, in fairness, Barry Town Council, since the election in May, have put £200,000 into a fund towards getting the necessary happening. And we're having discussions about a place, and we have high hopes for. So we're quite excited about that. But in the meantime, I also do walks in the cemetery. We recently had the Green Heritage Award granted to our cemetery. It's the only one in the Vale. There's only one of about 8 or 9 in the whole of Wales, including places like St Fagans and Margam Park.
Good
so
company.
we're absolutely, and that's because we're starting to sell and tell the history, because all the people that we talk about, they're all buried there.
Of course.
And that in itself is a story, and it's wonderful. Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, well, that's brilliant. Nick, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Diolch yn fawr. And it's great to because there's so much I've learned from this conversation that I didn't have a clue about, and a lot of loose ends tied together as well. And I would really strongly urge you to have a look at that Facebook page. Quite apart from anything else, the photography, the old photographs of Barry. I mean, it's a case of, that looks vaguely I know exactly where that is. So that's absolutely wonderful stuff. So look, that's drawn our conversation to a close. We really hope you've enjoyed it. There'll be a visual version of it launched on YouTube in the next week or so. So you can by all means come and have a look at what we look like.
God help you.
We would recommend it if you can. So a little bit of forward planning, because we've been talking about how great our ancestors were at looking holistically at things. So a bit of forward planning. The next episode of History on Your Doorstep goes out on Monday the 24th of October, which is dangerously close to Halloween. So it'll be a spooky one. If you could put some echo on that, by the way, when you edit, that'd be great. So we're going to have a Halloween one, a little announcement as well. I know many listeners to this show are aware that I am an author, that I publish books. So you may be interested to know I have a new one, which is coming out beginning of October. It's called More Legends and Folklore of Barry, Bridgend and the Vale. And similar to the first book, it's full of little, some of the more quirky excerpts of our local history and some of the folklore that makes your hair stand on end. So that'll be available from all good bookshops. But look, until next time we talk, enjoy your history. Thank you.